the How to Write a Hero panel, which is going to be our final proper panel of Everfree Northwest 2014 for the writing track, but we have got a wonderful lineup here. I'm excited to get it started. I was going to say, why don't we just go ahead and start off by introducing ourselves down from the far end, talk about a little bit about ourselves and about one hero that we particularly admire or think is done well.
All right, my name is Zephyr with an X. Most of you probably won't recognize me, but I've written some stuff. I'm just a fan fiction author. I'm also part of the writing track staff here on Everfree, so hopefully you guys have all been enjoying the con we've put together and a lot of our writing events. As for heroes, I really admire, I think I would have to go with, anyone's familiar with it, Terry Pratchett's works, some of his young adult stuff. Tiffany Aching from the Tiffany Aching, there's the series of 3 books, and it's a young child that becomes a great hero, and she just does what's required of her. And I think that's the true definition of a hero.
I'm Georgia Ball, and I'm a comic book author. I wrote the Celestia Micro for IDW, and I'm currently writing the Littlest Pet Shop comic book series. My favorite hero, and I've read the books multiple times, was Lewin's Prydain Chronicles, because the progression of Taran from being a young boy who thought he knew what a hero was and throwing himself into situations that he shouldn't progresses all the way through 5 books to the point where he gives up everything to devote his life to helping people that were not magical, that were not going to give him anything, were not going to bring him everlasting life, but who really needed help.
I'm Brony Ryder. I'm a fan fiction author on fanfiction. I'll occasionally write heroes. And gosh, I'm gonna come up with a way better answer to this. Like, yeah, tonight I'm gonna be like, dang it, I should have said, oh, yeah.
Murphy's Law.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell what kind of hero I like. I like those heroes who are kind of pulled into it unwittingly and, like, despite their personalities, they're still gonna go ahead and do the right thing, even though they may not want to. They're dragged into their heroic situations, kicking and screaming, but they're still going to do it in the end. So I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head. And again, I'm going to wake up tonight and go, him, perfect example. The panel was 12 hours ago. Never mind. So yeah, if that makes sense, then yep.
Unwilling heroes. Good.
Unwilling heroes, yep.
I'm PK. I wrote Antipodes and its sequel. Kind of wrote that. It's been a year now, and I've uploaded 4 chapters. And I also work for Quest for Daily. And this is a much harder question than the villains one was. I guess my favorite hero, or at least the one that had the most influence on me, would be Harry Potter from Harry Potter. Yeah.
My name is Duskwatch. I'm an editor on FimFiction, but not actually an author. I'm also a former Marine, and I guess for my favorite hero in real life would probably be Carlos Hathcock, who you guys probably won't recognize. But in Ponyfiction, it's probably going to be Commander Hurricane from Of Skies Long Forgotten. So I've got a couple friends in the audience that are editors for that, so that's kind of fun. But at the same time, it's a good character, so.
And I'm Horizon. I'm your host today, and I am another fanfiction author on fanfiction.net. I am one of the curators of the Royal Canterlot Library, which does author interviews and posts them weekly to fanfiction as well. And in terms of favorite heroes, I don't know about favorite, but certainly one that I find very well done would be a character called Spider Jerusalem from the comic book series Transmetropolitan. The thing is that he's not actually a very likable guy, but he is there's something that transforms him into a hero. He has this higher purpose that he's working for. And we can get into that a little bit. Quick note before we really start launching in here, because we are recording, if you have questions, what we'd like you to do would be to go ahead and line up in front of that microphone down the side there. And we will definitely get through questions and comments and whatnot, as many as we can. So we just need you to speak into the microphone so that the various recordings can pick up the back and forth between you guys and our panelists. So if you have something to say, just go ahead at any time and start lining up against that wall there, and we'll pull questions first come, first serve. In the meantime, let's kind of get started. What are kind of throw this out to the panelists here. What are some of the factors that turn characters from just being protagonists into genuinely being heroes? Maybe some of the things that stand out about some of the characters we just mentioned.
Well, I mean, I would say, with the example I used of Tiffany Aching, it's not that she was ever the type to be a hero or she was just a little girl, but when the situation got bad, she was the one that didn't say no. So just the one that's still standing and still there when things go wrong and just keeps doing it anyway, no matter if they think they're going to succeed. I think that sort of separates hero from just the character we're following because they're the protagonist.
I agree with Ronin Rider about the sort of unwilling hero, and the way that can make a hero is just when somebody is thrown into this situation they didn't ask for, this really intense, unexpected one, and they make the right decision. They make good choices. I think that's what the essence of a hero is somebody who makes the right choice instead of the easy one.
I think another aspect of that with the unwilling hero too is not just that they make the right choices, is that sometimes they realize they do the best they can with what they've got. But that being said, sometimes they have to actually make the bad choice to serve a greater good. So they actually have to do something that would be, for lack of a better term, would be evil. But it ends up being, in the long run, the better choice to prevent a greater evil down the road. So there's that aspect of it as well. And I think that's another one of those, is a character that's willing to make that sacrifice and go, I'm willing to be the fall guy for this. Even though I know what I'm doing is bad, but I'm willing to take this fall because down the road, if I don't, something far worse is going to happen.
Yeah, and that kind of gets into the overlap between heroes and villains, but yeah, in some ways, there is a lot of overlap there.
I figured this quote is going to come up eventually, so I might as well just say it now. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. So that certainly applies. I also think it can also be the ones who actually got up and did something while everyone else was just talking. I don't know how many of you read Chengar Kordath's Winning Verse. But in one of his alternate universe side stories, Rarity's not a fashionista. She's a teacher at a girls' school, and she moonlights as a superhero. Yeah. But Chengar really does exist. Yes, it's kind of mixed between Radiance and Mare-y-Sue kind of thing, and Batman, incidentally enough. But she got into it because everyone was saying, oh, the crime rate's really bad. Somebody should do something about it. And another quote from the story was, Rarity says, whenever somebody says somebody should do something about it, what they really mean is somebody else should do something about it. So a hero could be that somebody who's like, I'm going to be the one who actually does something about it, who stands up and says, let's get this done. I'm not going to take this anymore.
Yeah, another quote that I've heard is, a hero is no braver than anybody else. A hero is just braver for 5 seconds longer. Yeah.
Also dumber in most cases, just FYI.
Oh, just thinking to myself, I thought Harry Potter is a great example of a hero in all the times that all the other students didn't believe him and the teachers didn't believe him, and he was always sticking by what he knew was to be true. And that takes a lot of courage that everybody can relate to.
Yeah, I think courage is definitely one thing that defines a hero. Is the courage, not necessarily to face down a bad guy, although we see a lot of that in the show, but just courage in general to stand up for what's right.
To continue that comment, I think another good summation of courage is there's a quote by, I can't remember who it's by now, but it says, courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to do what is right in the face of it. And so that's another aspect of a hero, is that yes, they're afraid and they're willing to embrace the fact that they're afraid, but at the same time they realize I still have to do my job. So there's just a bit of sheer perseverance that goes into it as well. So
there's a reason Link doesn't have the Triforce of Wisdom.
One of the things I've always think about with heroes is you were talking about the responsibility. You hit on that earlier about they're the ones willing to step up and maybe do the hard or even what seems like the wrong thing, take the blame for it, be the fall guy. And it is that thing about they're the one saying, okay, I'm going to be the one responsible. I am going to, whether it's, I'm going to, like you said, sometimes it's the fall guy and sometimes it's just the one that says, I will be the one that does something instead of stands by. I think that all ties into, I'm going to be the responsible one here. I'm going to take responsibility for the situation and just step up. And I think that's it, a lot of heroes.
I kind of feel like the person that does things for the greater good could just as easily be a villain, though. Like, I don't know if I would necessarily call that a heroic trait, because it's really easy to, I can think, I know I've read stories where there are people that do terrible things for the greater good.
You're saying,
and
I think there's a difference between because they think it's for the greater good. I think the difference in the in judgment, like they talk about history will judge,
right,
is was it actually for the greater good? And that's how we do the difference between Winston Churchill letting a town get bombed to keep a secret code versus some other horrible things that people might have done if they weren't on the side of right as history judged it. Well, they were the villains instead of heroes.
Well, it's like I said yesterday. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. The one to heaven is paved with the ones that worked out.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, please, again, feel free if you have questions to just kind of wander up towards the microphone. In the meantime, let's go ahead and open up a can of worms. I'm going to ask the panelists here, which of the main six do you think is most heroic? Let's put some let's put some folks on the spot. Georgia, would you like to start us off? Yeah.
Well, I'm going to have to go with just thinking about how the show is written and structured, that Twilight Sparkle is intended to be the hero of the program. she's got the most screen time and she goes through the most change, and her supporting characters all get their opportunities to be heroic, but the most times that it happens, it usually ends up happening to Twilight.
Yeah, I agree pretty much completely. I feel like it would be really hard to argue that anyone else is the hero. Like overall, like there are individual stories in which they may be the protagonist, but I would say that Twilight is the hero of the series, and I think that's kind of clear cut, but I'm sure people are going to disagree.
I kind of lean the same way because going back to the responsibility thing, at the end of the day, Twilight's the one panicking because things are her fault. Even when it's not her fault, she's taking it to be her fault and trying to make it fixed. Now, sometimes that goes totally horribly wrong.
See less of zero.
Yes, but she's stepping in and trying to do that. So out of the main six, I think if there was a close second, I think it would be Applejack, because she's the one always reining them in when things go wrong and trying to fix the situation and be the responsible grown-up, as it were. So,
I should mention that I'm massively biased in favor of Twilight Sparkle in any kind of positive pony quality question. So,
I'm going to disagree with everybody, actually, and this is going to be a weird one, but I'll do my best to justify it. And I would actually say it's Rarity. And the reason I say this is because Rarity is the one that, I mean, let's face it, she's afraid of dirt. But she's the one that's always willing to step up, and when her friends are in trouble, all of that gets pushed to the sidelines in the end, and she's willing to actually go out of her way to make sure that the rest are taken care of. So, in that respect, she's a bit different than all the rest of them. All the rest of them don't really have to necessarily. I mean, Fluttershy, but then Fluttershy is afraid of everything. So, none of the rest of them have to, on a regular basis, push the boundaries of what they consider to be comfortable and normal. Rainbow Dash is always up for adventure. Applejack is pretty much good for anything. And also, I would argue, the sense of the group in the one that, you know, provides the backdrop of let's stop and think this through and be practical about it type thing. But Rarity is the one that always has to go outside of her comfort zone when it comes to taking a long trip. Those are, as a person who's had to do that with a 70-pound pack and what it takes to plan for a long expedition, I can tell you it's not easy. You get dirty, you smell, you don't get a shower. It's just disgusting, and Rarity's still up for the challenge. So that's my take on it.
I'm actually going to, disagree with the Twilight Sparkle fan base over there, and because I think the way that I see it, Twilight Sparkle is pretty much destined to be a hero in the first place. We have, everything going on with the books that Celestia and Luna are reading. We have, she's been groomed for this. She's being pushed to Ponyville by her mentor. I don't think it takes as much heroism to stand up when it's expected of you that it does to stand up when you are just, well, let's say Fluttershy, cripplingly afraid of literally everything. I think there's a lot of heroism in Fluttershy in particular when she, is basically just going out her door is a pretty spectacular act for her, and yet she's doing things like standing up and staring down dragons.
Would you say it's a dangerous business going out your door?
Perhaps. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I agree with your point about the groomed for being a hero as opposed to doing big things despite the fact that you face more insurmountable challenges. The example that I like to use is Superman. The very concept of Superman bores me. He's yes, he faces somebody as intellectually strong as he is physically strong, but that doesn't change anything. He's still, they just tack on a new power every time he faces a different challenge. He's got what, laser breath, or laser eyes, ice breath, I don't, they'll probably add that too. What to you sounds like the more interesting story? Superman flying around the world and stopping 2 nuclear weapons, or some guy looking at a coffee barista from Starbucks and going, dude, you gotta stop 2 nuclear weapons. Yeah. What's the more interesting story? The second one, because you look at Superman and go, I have a general idea of how Superman's going to stop the nukes. But you look at the barista who's making minimum wage and ask him, stop the nukes, you have no idea how he's going to do it.
With the world's best espresso, which sadly we have not had at this con.
I think in just sort of a broader thing, to be a good hero, they actually have to have personal struggle, which is something that Superman does not have at all. He is a perfect, literally superhuman Adonis, who doesn't ever have to grow and change because he's already perfect. Applejack. Yeah, that's
okay. Are you folks lined up for questions along the way? Okay, I just nobody was approaching the mic, so yeah. Kind of far away. Yeah. Yeah, just go ahead and bring it over.
You mentioned that when you're in the Marines that you have to go through all the stuff. You're really dirty, really tired, and you said that you kind of feel like Rarity's a hero, kind of in that sense. Would you say that Rarity would make a good Marine?
Well, I've met some ones that are pretty prissy, so that said, a lot of it at the end of the day is just being willing to suck it up and go the extra mile when we have to. And again, when push comes to shove, Rarity has always done that in the show. When they had to go find a dragon, it's this huge trek up a mountain and through all this other stuff, and we don't really know how far that really was, but on the flip side of that coin, it couldn't have been an easy journey. And yet she was right there from the get-go, ready to rock and roll. And yes, she's going to whine about needing to have her poncho be the right colors and how camouflage is so disgustingly drab. And but at the same time, she's still going to go. So yeah, I kind of think she would actually in some ways.
Thank you. But actually, my friend's in the Marines right now. He's stationed in Japan. I think I'll tell him that. Tell him to watch My Little Pony, say Rarity's like a Marine, be like Rarity.
Yeah, and you might have to break it down for him a little bit in that respect. But also make sure that when he goes, the standard issue camo gear is kind of important. It's there for a reason. And yes,
he's there right now.
Purple and yellow and orange would look fabulous, but I don't like getting shot. It's not high on my to-do list. So,
thank you.
Accessorize.
All right. Okay, let's go ahead and take another question. Yeah.
So a good hero can, by example, like really inspire people because they usually do good things. They're good traits. And some of my favorite heroes are actually ones that are very pure in essence, and who are very resolute to what they mean at their core. You can create a whole web of lies and deceit and subterfuge, but you toss Captain America into it, and he causes the whole thing to unravel by not being simple, but by his purity and simplicity as a character. However, if you have someone who is so resolute, you mentioned Superman earlier, they become very predictable. So I'm curious, how do you make a character who takes that purity and still write a very interesting story about someone who is, in a sense, kind of predictable and boring?
For me, I think I would say that the important quality there, or one of the really important qualities, is just sincerity. If they're a sincere character, like that can be really refreshing, especially when you're talking about, like Captain America. He's a very sort of sincere guy. He's America, and that is just a really sort of good quality in a person, and it can also help make that character, give them that sense of purity, just that they don't play the sort of mind games that everyone else does.
I would tell you that writers that control which character they're working on, they're writing their own series, their own books, for example, decide what type of hero that they feel comfortable writing for. But writers do have to write for Superman and write for Captain America, and people that take on those kind of challenges tailor their conflicts to their person. You have somebody like Captain America that you know what he's like, and that he always tends to take things at face value and support American or government ideas, and you give him a situation where those things are falling apart. You have Superman, he can do just about anything. You end up having to create villains, monsters, outer space situations that are just beyond the scope of anything you can imagine a normal person having to deal with.
I would just add, when you're talking about like they're simplistic, I think what you mean is that they're morally resolute, they're straightforward in like their morality. And I think an easy way to put conflict into that is put situations in there that aren't morally clear. Captain America always wants to do the right thing, but you got to put the situation there where it's not clear what's the right thing. I think the latest Captain America movie tried to do that. They tried to say, it's unclear who the good guys are. He thought it was S.H.I.E.L.D. that he was working for, or the U.S. government, but maybe it's not. Maybe they're actually turning into the bad guys. So you put those moral quandaries in there. So even though the character is morally resolute and simple, the situation he's in is not. So the complexity and the challenge comes from trying to figure out which way to go and make that judgment.
All right. Next question.
I want to preface my question by saying that Rincewind from the Discworld novels would be an example of a reluctant hero that you're asking about.
Yes, very much.
But I also wanted to ask, how do you do heroes come as a sort of a priority thing? Are they like the one in the spotlight the most is the hero? Because to use the first episode as an example, even though Twilight Sparkle and her friends were the ones who saved the day, in the last 5 minutes, you find out that the entire thing was all part of Celestia's plan to not just have them save the day, but to actually save her sister. So would she actually be considered more of the hero in that, or is it just Twilight Sparkle because she was the one on stage when it happened?
Dancing on the strings.
Yeah.
I would say that when you have an ensemble cast, like My Little Pony has, or for example, Lost, it's harder to pick just a singular hero out of that, and I don't really know if they're structured in quite a way that you can just point at one character and be like, this one is the hero. They all sort of have qualities that make them heroic or not heroic, depending, and they all kind of contribute to how that works. So, I mean, I had to say Twilight Sparkle was probably the most heroic character, but I don't know if I would just say that, like, she is the hero and the rest of them are not the hero. Like, I don't know if I would say it like that.
Yeah, stories don't tend to have like one hero, especially in situations where if one doesn't do their job, the whole thing falls apart. If Rarity doesn't give her tail to the sea serpent, there's no element of generosity, Luna's not saved, the world falls into darkness forever, they all die. Imagine, think about it like in a real world situation, like firefighters, like a building's burning down. Everyone has to do their part to get everyone out, maybe save someone who's trapped, and to get the blaze, put out. So once everything is said and done, they're all heroes.
I would just add, don't conflate hero and protagonist. Protagonist is the characters we follow. Hero, there can be heroes that aren't even on screen, as it were. So a hero, by definition, might not even show up in the narrative, but they might have played a background role. You see that often in prequels and sequels that, oh, this was really because someone else did a whole lot of stuff behind the scenes. They were a hero too.
And I'm just curious to get Miss Ball's take on this about Celestia, since it was directly aimed at her.
Well, I think that we've talked a lot about how the hero is the one that takes responsibility, and you can make a lot of comparisons between, and it's not an accident. I mean, Celestia's character does draw really heavily from the concept of Dumbledore. So you say there's a difference between the person that's the mastermind and when they're actually having to put themselves on their own life in danger. And there are plenty of times when Celestia does. And there's instances where Dumbledore has to put his own life on the line. But then you're just getting into nuances of what's more heroic. It's still people that are on the side of good, I would say. And then there's actual acts of heroism.
Thank you.
All right. Let's go ahead and just skip past one question here, and we'll just get back to you in a moment.
I just wanted to hear like a discussion among you. You kind of started it about this ensemble and going back to this idea of who's the hero in the main six, and it just kind of got me to thinking that heroes are the ones that are go above and beyond the rest to do the right thing and all that. But I feel that they also are the ones that stand next to their peers, and they're the ones that needs like an ensemble like Hermione and Ron and Harry Potter and the rest of the main six to anchor them down to like this, like to an almost kind of the reality of everything else that maybe they're too kind of high to see. And I just want to hear your thoughts on that, about like how the hero is the one that is above and beyond, but that they need a group, and it always seems to work out in that dynamic, that there is always a group that helps them with the heroes and stuff like that.
I completely agree. I think that Harry wouldn't be nearly as good of a hero, and it wouldn't be nearly as good of a story without Ron and Hermione. Finn wouldn't be anywhere without Jake. It helps to keep, when you have those, I think deuteragonist is the right term, am I right? People?
Yeah, the protagonists and then deuteragonists.
Right. They help sort of keep the hero grounded and serve, as an example of, how really heroic the main character can be. Because, Ron and Hermione are heroes in their own right, but Harry is the one who had all of this, crap in his past and all of these opportunities to do the wrong thing, all of this temptation. It would have been so easy for him, like so many others, and like Voldemort himself, to choose the path of evil. And the fact that he didn't is, sort of a testament to the effect that his friends have had on him and to Harry's own moral character. So I think that, the deuteragonists are a really important element to making a good hero and showing how they stand out.
Thank you.
Yeah. And one last thing to add to that was that when you look at the show that we're writing about, we have My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic, and as was pointed out last panel, this is something where the very premise of the show is that there is a power within those social connections.
I think also to add to that too is, and sort of build on what was said earlier about how there can be heroes that don't even show up in the main story. There's some really great examples of this in a lot of other pony stories that we've seen, and interestingly, the winning verse is one of those realms where it happens, where you've got characters that are doing things in the background that, unless you go back and you read all of the side stories that are with it, and there's a ton out there, a lot of the times you don't even see some of the things that are going on, but you've got these ponies in the background that are really, really big heroes that just sort of never get mentioned. But the characters in the story know that those events are taking place, at least somewhere in the back of their mind. They might not know all of the details. And that helps give them the strength and hope and determination to go through the things that they have to go through, sort of inspiring them to be heroes as well. And so we go back to that thing of not all of the heroes are there in the spotlight. Some of them are in the background, and that's kind of a big deal. So.
Okay, let's go to the next question.
So I know a lot of heroes in like cartoons, games, and stuff are really positive, upbeat characters, but how do you guys feel about heroes who start out either unlikable or deeply flawed and then eventually become more heroic?
Oh, I love them.
Yeah. Like I was thinking, for example, Riku from Kingdom Hearts, he actually starts out on the evil side, but then becomes, I would argue, a stronger hero than Sora.
Yeah, no, I think the flawed, unlikable heroes are far more interesting. It just kind of ties back into the reluctant hero a little bit, I think. So the guy comes in and they're all like, save the town. No, I just came here for the gasoline. So I guess Mad Max is my example. I don't know. I feel like I have a better one, but yeah, Mad Max. Sure, we'll go with that. Some guy who walks into a town and he's like, I just want what I want, and I'm going to do whatever I can to get it. But then, so he's just a jerk the whole story, but then he realizes, no, I kind of got to help these guys out. I don't want to. I will anyway.
I think another good example of that particular aspect too, and this goes into some psychology issues that maybe we'll touch on later and maybe not, I don't know. But as a real world example, I had, on my last deployment in Iraq, I had two different commanding officers, and I absolutely despised one of them because he was a horrible human being. But at the same time, because of my position, I got to see some of the behind the scenes stuff that was not common knowledge in what went on. And this was, granted, it was political, but it was still a really great thing to see, that we had the general of the base come and tell us, running all of the communications equipment, that we were no longer allowed to call home because he wanted to call his wife. And mysteriously, his phone just stops working the next day. And so there's some aspects of, it made him a hero in the sense that not everybody in the battalion knew that, but I did because I was directly involved in that particular interaction in working the position I was at the time. But he sort of became, when that started to spread, that bit of rumor started to spread of what had actually happened, it turned him into a hero, even though the entire battalion hated him. And so there's that aspect of heroes that are not necessarily strong and pure, but they're still good at what they do.
People love reformed heroes, don't they? People just love those characters. I mean, Luke was supposed to get the girl, right? And then Han came along and he does that huge reformation from being just total scoundrel of the galaxy to coming back and saving Luke's butt, and then suddenly, like, well, obviously he has to get the girl after that. I mean, well, does anybody really think that it was a plan that they were brother and sister all along?
No.
I was going to say, and on that note, Discord, I mean, the show has villains. I mean, Luna was possessed, perhaps, or however you want to interpret your headcanon on that. But Discord was the bad guy. He wasn't pure and good and all that, but he realized that making friends was actually something that was more valuable to him than doing just what he wanted. And whether he's a hero or not, but maybe in time we'll see that it happened. So I mean, the show has a great example of that already, I think.
Yeah, I think this overlaps a little bit with the redemption of the villain that we talked about at the villain panel yesterday. And yeah, it's just a really good, sort of satisfying thing to see these characters grow and change and realize the error of their ways and, become good guys, or at the very least, when the cards are all down, do the right thing. It gives you that sort of moment of triumph vicariously, which is really satisfying. And one of my favorite examples, and I promised myself I wasn't going to do it, but I have to use another example from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yes.
Zuko.
Yes, that is great.
Honor.
All right, next question.
So, when writing a fallen hero, one who is he either feels responsible for a great tragedy, or maybe someone's poisoned his mind with bad philosophy. Like Spider-Man, when he throws his suit away, there's no use, I'm just going back to being a normal person. Or Billy, I think his name was, from Adventure Time. All the people I've saved are probably dead now. How do you write a character like that? Maybe even one who might be becoming the villain. How do you write them and express their emotions without boring your audience with whining and just depressing brooding?
You break them.
You break them?
I think it's nice to take their personality traits and turn them on their heads. So
discord them.
Yeah. I mean, the perfect example, really. One of the stories that I read, it was by this author named, I think, Cleverpun. Speaking of discording, where Discord has just been defeated again, and his idea is, he gets out again, and his idea is, okay, so last time I tried this, I made their flaws go out of control. What if I made their virtues go out of control instead? And Twilight, so Twilight's magic goes out of control, Fluttershy's kindness goes out of control, Rainbow Dash's loyalty goes out of control, and so on and so forth. And eventually they all turn kind of evil, and sometimes not even kind of. Twilight wants to take over the world because she's like, I'm the most powerful thing ever now, so I can rule all of you.
I think one thing to keep in mind with that, when you're trying to make a fallen hero, if they're starting off good and heroic, a fallen hero is never falling in their own mind. They're doing what in their head sounds like maybe the right thing, or even if they're sort of giving up, it doesn't sound, I don't think they're considering like, I'm turning into a bad guy. So if you can find out and imagine what the internal logic is, how they're viewing the world, how their worldview is changing, and if you can keep what's in their head internally logical and consistent from their point of view, it'll make a more realistic fallen hero, I think.
I think if you concentrate on the show don't tell philosophy when you're writing, you're going to have less trouble with that. What you're worried about is boring people with brooding. I mean, a good example might be Watchmen, which is nothing but falling heroes. And we concentrate mainly on the action and showing you what's going on, the dialogue between the characters, as opposed to spending a whole lot of time concentrating, I guess, on exactly what Ozymandias, for instance, is thinking as he's putting his plan in place.
So less words.
Yeah, less words.
All right, next question.
What are your thoughts on Westegen reinterpreting or changing Westegen popular heroes such as James Bond, for example? Like before Westegen, before Casino Royale, he was just a really Westegen, just smooth talking person who just didn't really care for what he did. But in Westegen, in Casino Royale, he started to become really conflicted and like he didn't really like doing his job and like he was really insecure about things. And then at the end, he just, spoiler alert, he
dies.
He turned into Superman.
Pretty much.
So you're asking basically when they try and sort of reboot a hero
Yeah.
and sort of make him grittier and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it can be very, very refreshing if done right, and obviously disastrous if done wrong, a la Superman Returns, and Man of Steel. But you know, especially with big popular heroes like, you know, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, etc. Repetition is just boring. We don't want to hear or see or read the same Spider-Man story 8 or 9 times where Spider-Man goes through the exact same conflicts with the exact same villain for the exact same reason. So, yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just, if you read the original Ian Fleming novels, James Bond is a wish fulfillment character. He is the male version of a Mare-y Sue. And no matter how gritty you make him, he's still going to be, it's still going to be more about fulfilling your fantasy through the character. I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong with that, but it's probably not something that I would write, and I frequently don't go to see James Bond movies. So, yeah, that's complicated to talk about how to do that well. Because I think the only way to do it well is to have a good plot and have a lot of action and have a lot of things to distract from the fact that the character themselves is not really a real person.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, and one thing that is interesting about that reboot effect is that you can actually kind of see it and trace it culturally, where especially in the comics genre. I mean, as it went from the golden age, you know, moved towards kind of through the 70s and 80s, and you saw a lot of the you know, reinterpretations of characters around that time getting much darker. And so that's something that, I mean, in some respects has already kind of played itself out, and we're starting to see, you know, a different wave of reinterpretations kind of take place as it teeters back and forth between that, you know, those deconstructions of the heroes and then just bringing them back again and what we liked about them in the first place.
I think another part of that too, and you mentioned Man of Steel, which is a good example of this, and it kind of goes back into that fallen hero thing as well that was asked just a minute ago, in that in rebooting the character, a lot of people also forget that he ended up being a great hero, and as much as Superman is boring because he's predictable, but he ended up being this great hero, but at the same time he's also still flawed. And so there's that aspect of writing heroes that we have to remember they're still imperfect. If they were perfect, then they would be Mare-y Sue, and the whole story would just fall apart, which some could argue that Superman actually is. But he's, especially in Man of Steel, it shows a couple scenes, and he's this moody, petulant, vindictive jerk, basically. There's spoiler alert, there's one scene in a diner where this trucker gets up in his face, and then he just walks away, and you know, he basically just takes all the vitriol that this guy's spitting out and walks away. But then when the trucker goes outside, he finds out that his 80,000 pound semi truck is been suspended 60 feet in the air on these giant steel girders that are put into the ground. And so he's not perfect. He's this moody, petulant guy. And he has to deal with that in becoming a hero, and that's kind of, it works the opposite way when you're writing a fallen hero or having to deal with a hero that is now having to deal with personality issues of, I don't like what I'm doing, or I don't necessarily understand what I'm becoming, or that kind of thing. And the other thing specifically to James Bond is we have to remember that James Bond, the agent 007, is not one hero but many. Because the hero is actually 007 who doesn't exist, which is why we've had so many different James Bond. James Bond is an idea as much like Batman was. He wasn't a singular person, so there's that as well.
All right, thank you. Next question.
So earlier the question was brought up about heroes and their teammates. Harry Potter and Hermione, you know, they had, and Ron, sorry, forgot the third. They work as a team. Ultimately,
who needs them?
Yeah. Okay, so okay, so Harry ultimately rises. He becomes the hero in the end, but he does it sort of on his own. His team is there to support him along the way, but he ultimately succeeds, just like Twilight. She ultimately succeeds on her own. What about heroes sort of like Sora from the Kingdom Hearts games, who literally rely on their friends being there?
I haven't played Kingdom Hearts, so I can't comment specifically on that.
Yeah,
but
kind of
I think an example that I can say is Frodo from Lord of the Rings, who literally succeeds only because Sam was there at the end.
I find it interesting, actually, that you think that Twilight Sparkle does not rely on her friends in that same way.
She does. I mean, it's clear she does need her friends, but ultimately, in the end, she's usually, especially in the season 3 finale, she's it.
That's true. I feel like it's because, at least with Harry Potter, the story fundamentally is about Harry. I mean, it's called Harry Potter. And so that's, you know, at the end, you know, his friends fall away, all his support networks fall away, and that's sort of another one of the things that drives in how heroic he really is. You know, at the end, when he has to march out alone into the woods to die, or what he expects is he's going to die, helps, you know, to reinforce the fact that he's really and truly a hero at this point, because he no longer has these people here to back him up. He is sacrificing himself for him, which is, at least, you know, in the Harry Potter books, you know, the sacrifice, especially for the people you love, is held up as the ultimate heroic ideal.
Okay, next question.
All right, you sort of touched on this earlier, but I was curious. If you have a supporting villain who gets double-crossed or something throughout the story, and then ends up laying down their life to support the protagonist so that they can do what they're going to do, is that character still, is it a hero now, or is it not, or what are your thoughts on that?
I would say he definitely becomes a hero when he decides to do that. I think that is pretty darn redeeming. It's hard to have somebody still be considered it's hard to have somebody who does that still be considered wholly a bad guy after that point. So,
I think Star Wars answered that great. Darth Vader died a hero. You saw him standing next to Obi-Wan at the end. Like, I mean, they were just putting a lampshade on that. Like, oh no, he did the right thing in the end and threw the Emperor down the pit. Well, so he gets to go to Jedi heaven or whatever. So, you know, that's where heroes go. Jedi Valhalla.
I think another aspect of that too is, in the teammate sense, is that a lot of people, we get things like Twilight succeeds in the end, right? She's the heroine, the one that succeeds, but does that necessarily make her the hero? And to relate this back to a real world example, and I realize this is kind of a little dark, but I apologize, but I'm going to go there anyway. In the case of like a Medal of Honor recipient, we haven't had a living recipient of a Medal of Honor since World War II. I'm sorry, since Vietnam. We had a couple in Vietnam, but we haven't had any since Vietnam. And everyone says that the Medal of Honor recipient is the hero in that sense, but he's the one that didn't succeed. He's the one that sacrificed himself for everybody else. So, but we do that because we realize there's a team out there and we're part of that team, and that team needs to succeed whether or not I do personally. And so there's that aspect of we have to rely on our teammates to, you know, and yes, they did a great thing. They did a very noble thing. But at the same time, does that necessarily make them the hero that everyone should look at, and nobody should pay attention to the rest of the people that were involved in that team that did actually succeed in the end? And that goes back to the thing of Twilight actually has to rely on her friends to accomplish these things. So that doesn't necessarily make Twilight the hero. That might make them the hero for just being there to make sure that goal gets accomplished. Spike is a good example of that, actually, is in the Crystal Empire, when she gives the heart to Spike because she realizes, I can't do this. And so she becomes that one that's the member of the team that says, I have to hand this off to somebody else, and Spike becomes the hero in that particular case. And so, but who was the real hero in that story? Was it Spike because he just finished out that last little bit, or was it Twilight for realizing that as a part of a team, she couldn't be the one to succeed? So there's that aspect of it as well.
There's a little asterisk to that with the villain, the secondary villain. I think it all depends on the motivation of the secondary villain of laying down their life for defeating the first one. If it's for something like, oh, I'm getting revenge on the first villain, then I'd say no. I mean, I feel awful. I feel so awful for doing this, but it's a perfect point.
Are you going to
Transformers 3?
Oh.
I know. I told you I feel bad. I know. I'm sorry.
Explosions.
I'll mea culpa. But in that one movie, there's a primary villain, and there's a secondary villain whose name starts with an M, whose name a popular football player took. And sure, Martin and Sean Prime. So Sean Prime betrays Oswald Prime, and so now Sean Prime is the villain, and Martin is convinced by the puny little human that if he doesn't betray Sean, that he's going to get the short end of the stick anyway. So then he defeats Sean, or helps Oswald Prime defeat Sean. I wouldn't call Martin a hero in that instance because he did it for vendettic reasons, not a personal sense of justice or morality. Like, he didn't have a paradigm shift. He did it for petty, I want to be the one in power. And I would like to issue an apology to everyone.
Can I just want to ask a quick follow-up, sort of leading into that. Do you think that the moral rightness is essential for a hero? It's basically what that seemed to sum up to was, as long as they're in the moral right, is the only way they can be considered heroes.
Well, if I stab you in the back for vendettic reasons,
I'm not
I don't
disagreeing
see that as
necessarily,
heroic.
just wondering.
Yeah,
I'm going to jump in while you're thinking about that one. To relate it back to that real-world example I was talking about earlier with the CO I had in Iraq, was he morally right in cutting off the base general's phone access because he came and demanded that none of the communication, matter of fact, nobody on the base, not just the communications battalion, could call home because he couldn't get through to his wife? So was our CO morally in the right in doing that? I would say no, absolutely not. But he did it anyway, and that kind of made him a hero in everybody's eyes once the news came out.
In the 30 seconds I've had to think about this, I find myself agreeing that, yeah, they do need to be in the morally right. Even if they're using these kind of, anti-Batman sort of dark anti-hero kind of borderline methods to do a morally right thing, they're still heroic. And I feel like if they do the right thing, like if it is, if they lay down their life to vindictively spite their old master or whatever, like the henchman defects to, screw over the villain, then that is not heroic. I mean, it's a good thing that they did, but they did it for the wrong reasons, and I feel like that kind of disqualifies them from being a hero. But again, an asterisk to this, that I have not had the time to form a nuanced opinion or do research, so.
I generally agree. I just think it's something important if we're working on defining heroes, that I think that moral rightness, or at least that they are pursuing moral rightness, is a key definition of what makes a hero.
Yes.
Yeah. Next question.
Hi. Time and time again, we've seen heroes who were overpowered and stay that way, or heroes who were ridiculously underpowered and then slowly grow into being really powerful. Has there ever been a hero who was underpowered and stayed that way? If so, can that be done well?
Aquaman.
Yeah.
No. Done well.
Yeah. Ms. Ball, do you have any relevant experience in comics with this?
I'm trying to think of an example like that. Yeah. It's hard because powered kind of makes it sound like it's somebody that has powers, and then you end up in the superhero territory. And honestly, I think that a lot of superhero work is not done well. Usually if the characters, I think, Aquaman would be one of those that seem like his powers are kind of dumb, but I mean, over time people have souped those up a little bit, and I've enjoyed the comics a little bit more than they used to, but it still wouldn't be a comic book that I would read.
I mean, think about this. Aquaman talks to fish. That's his power. So, there's bad guys like flying in helicopters over the sea. Boom, suddenly sharks jump up from the ocean and tear up the helicopters, and, the bad guys fall down into the sea, and, they get swarmed by it. And it's like, okay, that's a little better than, hey, Nemo, can you and Dory go talk to that bad guy and turn them good?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, there are a lot of things in Pony, of course, the whole using friendship. I mean, you don't have to have a lot of power to Fluttershy convincing Discord to be nice because she's being nice. She's not using any powers there. She wasn't forcing him to. I don't think she even used the stare on him, or that it didn't work. So there's no powers, but she's still, being in a way heroic, trying to face down, same with the dragon, trying to be friendly to someone without having to be overpowered. I think a good example outside of Pony is Nick Fury from Avengers. I mean, all those superheroes there are amazingly overpowered, except for the guy with the arrows or whatever. But everyone still likes Nick Fury as a character because he's the guy getting stuff done. I mean, I think he would still be a hero. He's still trying to fight on the side of right, but he's just a mortal human in a world where Hulks run around and tear down buildings and aliens come out of space tunnels. So, I mean, I think everyone still likes him as a hero, and it's still done, and he never, as far as I know, I've never read all the comic books, gets superpowers or anything, but he's still one of the heroes.
Counterpoint, in Friendship is Magic, friendship is literally magic. So I think you could make an argument that their friendship actually does give them power.
True. It's some power, but it's weak compared to Twilight's beams of death stuff. So.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that another aspect of this is, what do you do with a character that has powers that, how do you turn them into a hero? And a good example of this would be the story Princess Celestia Gets Mugged, wherein she gets mugged by these two, I mean, let's face it, they're not very bright, by these two ponies, and they're hitting her over the head with stuff, and they're trying to subdue her, and she realizes, they're hitting her with this stick or club or whatever it was, and she's like, that sort of felt like getting hit by a pillow. But she kind of goes along for the ride, and there's no real hero in the story, I would argue. But how do you deal with a person like that has powers that using them at all in order to make them a hero would just make them into a Mare-y Sue character. How would you go about dealing with that?
A lot of the characters in My Little Pony they have powers, but it's kind of like the powers of plot convenience.
Yeah.
Magic just sort of happens whenever you need it. I tried to write like the Celestia Micro. She is a very powered character, but it give her a situation where magic just wasn't really necessary or would make any sense to use. I think characters are probably more interesting when they're trying to find solutions to problems that maybe are the same kind of solutions that we might be able to find ourselves without having powers.
Yeah. On that note, I don't know if this was in the Celestia Micro because I've just seen this page like isolated on the internet, but it was Celestia saying, someone asked her like, well, couldn't you just have dealt with all these problems yourself? Why, like, where were you during all this? And she was like, yeah, I could have easily dealt with all of these, but then Twilight wouldn't have had any opportunities to grow or learn anything.
Yeah, that was in one of Katie. No,
Okay.
that was actually in the Celestia Friends Forever. Okay. And the reason that I think it was Anderson that wrote that is the direct response to fan questions that have been running around the internet, asking exactly why that. Why is it that Princess Celestia has all this power and yet she still sends you out on the voyages to solve them? I mean, if we're going to be absolutely honest, the reason that is because Twilight is the main character, and Twilight needs to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
having Celestia do it all would be plot inconvenience.
Super boring. Yeah.
And that kind of gets back to the difference between the hero and the protagonist, where the protagonist is the person who the story is about. We're following the protagonist. We want to see them having a full character arc in which they grow, in which they learn something or change in some way. And Celestia's almost kind of an elemental force, I think, where she's just goodness incarnate. She is the Superman of the pony world.
In my story, she's literally an elemental force. So, like, I just didn't even try. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you. Next question.
Okay, first off, I want to apologize. I've been thinking about this. I've been trying to word this question the right way, and I was thrown off by mentioning of my name with the Transformers thing. But I am a huge fan of, like, the fanboy, the fanboy hero, the one who, ends up kind of in the situation where they're among their heroes and they're like so excited and stuff. And on the flip side, I also know that kind of stuff can get kind of really annoying really fast. I was wondering if you had any like thoughts on how that could be done well or of.
I can give you an example of how to do it very badly. Daring don't.
Yes.
Yeah. The only.
So do the opposite of that.
The only example that's coming to my mind for some reason is Syndrome from The Incredibles, which is the opposite. He was this ultimate Mr. Incredible fanboy who got the chance to meet him, and then Mr. Incredible was a little bit of a jerk, and it completely ruined Syndrome for life, which is not the same. But I would agree that Daring Don't is a great example of watch this and then do the opposite of that.
It'd be hard to do it better than Kung Fu Panda does it.
Yes, that was actually the whole inspiration for me liking that.
Or maybe you just really like Kung Fu Panda.
I was going to say, I was just having to look up who wrote this so I could get the names right here. There's a great book called Fallen Angels by Larry Niven, Jerry Purnell, and Michael Flynn. It's a sci-fi book. And in it, there's sort of a dystopian sci-fi where some of the people made it to space and live in space stations and are all highly technological, and the rest of Earth regressed. When the spacemen basically come back to Earth, there's still a bunch of science fiction conventions that are all operating underground and trying to keep old technology alive and stuff, and they're just made up of nothing but fanboys and fangirls too, but they're this sort of underground force. So when one of the astronauts gets stranded on Earth and can't get back up, all these sci-fi fanboys and stuff band together to try and build a rocket ship out of old parts that they found buried in museums and stuff like that, and help him get back to his home. And so it's a total great example of some really professional sci-fi authors doing an entire novel about fanboys becoming heroes.
Before I go and
catch me after the con, I'll give you the name and everything.
Yes,
of that.
could you give me
catch me at the end of the panel.
Thank you very much.
I also want the name of that. That sounds awesome.
I think just to add on to that a little bit, just to finish off, I think if you wanted to take it less seriously, try to do it comedically. Just do it like play it straight comedy. And the only thing that's coming to mind is Robot Chicken Star Wars. When George Lucas is in the elevator with the nerd dressed as the Tauntaun. Oh my gosh, you're George Lucas. I take it you're here for the convention? Oh yes. And he saves George Lucas from being mugged by a mob of fans.
I think one more thing to add to that really quickly too is a great example of that kind of thing where you've got a fanboy that sort of turns into a hero is, I don't know how many people in this room have watched the documentary on bronies that John Delancey was part of, where he talks about there were people that were coming to BronyCon when it, back in the beginning, that were really unsure about being part of this fandom and just having the freedom to embrace it. And there were 12-year-old, 12-year-old boys that were coming, and their parents were just not getting this. But they had the courage to go to the con, and then you get someone like John Delancey, who it turns out it actually is apparently quite a big fan, went down and met them and talked to them and just said, it's okay. I know it's a little weird, but it's okay for people to be like this. And so you get people that are fanboys that can turn into heroes in that same sense. And yes, John Delancey is a voice actor, and he does Discord, who's awesome, and he's a really well-known guy. But at the same time, he approached them as just a normal person that said, hey, this is okay. It's not anything to be degraded for or anything. It just, it's something unique to, your son or your daughter or whoever. And so he sort of turned into a hero in that respect, in that he's willing to just reassure people that it's okay. And that goes back to the fanboy becoming the hero type thing as well.
All right, thanks. Next question.
So there are characters like Rainbow Dash that talk a big game and then usually deliver in the end. There are characters like Twilight Sparkle and Ghostbusters who play down their capabilities and then do magnificent things. And then there are characters like Trixie and Ghostbusters who try and fail to live up to their claims. Do you have any tips for using the relationship between what a character says and what they do to impact the audience's perception of them as heroes?
Good question. Yeah. Well, I'm going to start by saying that this is actually kind of touches on something which we said we would cover, which is the idea of a Mare-y Sue. Because I think that a lot of what has to do with what makes a character a Mare-y Sue is the author telling us that this character is so great and wonderful and sparkly, and the story not telling us that. And so I think what you want to do is you want to be sure that you are creating the correct expectations with what you write into what you're actually delivering on the page. In terms of characters like that, just be aware of both what their talk is and what their game is. And you can do that, I mean, as you said, you can do that in pretty much any combination. You have characters that both do talk the talk and don't, and do walk the walk and don't. And as long as you are realistic about what their actual capabilities are, you're not basically making them great by just telling us how awesome they are and then making them jerks. As long as you have a good sense of that, I think you can get away with pretty much anything. It kind of comes down to just good writing. Make sure that you are aware of your characters, how your characters are coming across.
Read the first 2 chapters of my story and then don't do that.
Yeah. We'll come back to that later. We'll see if we can come back to that later as people get more ideas. But in the meantime, we got another question.
What is the fundamental difference between trying to write a hero and trying to write an anti-hero?
The man next to me looks like he has something to say.
I'm not sure yet. Give me a minute to parse this. Turned on hard.
Anti-heroes make the wrong decision most of the time. And they may even go through an entire film where you don't think that the right thing is ever going to be done. In fact, I think that the term was really first started to be applied to characters that didn't even make the right decision in them. They just never do. I think I want to say it's The Third Man, but I may be getting the wrong movie, where the protagonist, I mean, typically in literature, hero and protagonist have been a very synonymous term. So you have a movie like that where he just repeatedly does nothing but make mistakes. Even in the end, it's really the female character that has the moral high ground. And like no one's really a good person in the movie, and they called that was one of the first characters they ever called to be an anti-hero. What they really meant was it's a bad person that we're following all the way through the story. I mean, typically nowadays, that's just might be somebody like Constantine, who maybe smokes and drinks a lot, but still does the right thing. Most of the time, we try to apply moral rectitude or some kind of a good decision in the end. They did the right thing at the end when we say anti-hero, but I think originally it was a term that meant somebody that that's our protagonist, but they're not necessarily going to do what's right in the end.
This kind of came up yesterday as well in the villain panel, but I think another example of the difference between a hero and an anti-hero is that the Prince of Ponyville stories is kind of a good example in that Blue Blood at one point, and he's a character that apparently everybody from the show hates, and this is the only story I've read that actually made him into a likable character for me. There's a point where he has to do this. He's faced with this decision. He can basically stay in prison as a prisoner of the bad guy, or he can take command of the bad guy's army and sort of follow the orders that he's given, but not really motivate this army of creatures to go do what is really wanting to be done by the villain. And so he makes this decision because he thinks about it, and he says, if I stay here and do nothing, then the villain's going to lead this army, and it's going to be really, 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 really bad. But if I take command of this army, then I can limit the damage, basically. And so he makes this decision knowing that it's a bad decision, that it's an evil thing that he's doing, but at the same time, he says, I have to do this in the terms of the greater good. I have to do this evil thing. And that goes back to being the one that's willing to be that fall guy, so to speak. And it does corrupt him in the end. It turns him into this character that's, not perfect. And highly conflict. Well, he was like that before, but anyway, he does this thing, and it turns him, I think, into an anti-hero rather than a villain per se. And when he's found out that he's the one that's leading this army by all of the other of the main six and Zecora that were he was helping along the way before he got captured, and they go, What were you thinking? And he explains to them, he's like, look, I had to do this because if I didn't do this, it was going to be worse. And I'm not gonna say that I'm sorry for it. I'm not gonna apologize for it or regret what I did, because I did what I did because I believed it was right. And I think that's part of being an anti-hero, is that you realize the decisions you're making aren't right, but in your own internal rationalization, they become the right answer based on the limited options that you're presented with. So I think that's kind of another difference between a hero and an anti-hero as well.
I would say anti-hero to me is always, and as Georgia pointed out, originally the term has sort of changed in the modern usage for a lot of the vernacular nowadays. Originally it was just the protagonist we're following that's totally not good. To me, anti-heroes tend to be the ones that sort of fall in the middle. I mean, heroes are morally right, villains are in the moral wrong. I think we're all agreeing on that. To me, anti-heroes are those ones that are sort of in that neutral territory in the middle, just morally ambivalent or just gave up on the concept of morality and just are doing something that maybe is logically or somehow barely morally consistent in their head. Great examples are like the movie Super, or with Rainn Wilson, or Falling Down, I think with Michael Douglas, or who's the other one? God Bless America. There are a lot of movies, and a lot of these, I mean, a lot of those are basically sort of revenge fantasy things, because the protagonist is a character that is going overboard. Oh, that guy cut in line? Let's beat him with a wrench. That's way over the top. A hero would not do that. But he's not doing it because he has an evil plan to take over the world with a wrench. It's because that guy did something wrong. I'm tired of putting up with that. I'm going to fix it, and there's no moral compass anymore. And so those neutral characters, I think, are what a modern anti-hero is, at least in my definition.
I'm going to disagree slightly in that I don't think it's that the anti-hero lacks a moral compass. It's that they have a strong moral compass that does not match the rest of the world's.
True.
I'd mentioned Spider Jerusalem earlier, who is a very bad guy. He runs around, beating the poop out of random people on the street, and yet he's working for a higher principle, which is truth, and he is working to rein in a political system that is legitimately doing a lot of damage. And so what he's doing is, he forces himself onto the path of moral rightness when he thinks it's making a difference, and a lot of the rest of the time is just stress release, which is, bad stuff, but, there is a moral code which he is not breaking.
I was going to relate that also to, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it, the Liam Neeson movie, I think it's Ransom, where they kidnap his kids. Taken, yes, Taken.
Okay, next question.
I would like to tie in a story to it follows into a question of the underpowered hero, that notion that was presented earlier, at a little bit of risk of making an overly obscure reference. It is a spin-off of Fallout Equestria called Murky Number 7. I don't know if anyone has read it. Essentially, it is the story of a slave's bid for freedom. His actions are ultimately selfish, but his own freedom, essentially. But going along with earlier, the concept of like Rarity and Fluttershy overcoming their own internal obstacles, there's a lot of that. Well, those actions in and of themselves could potentially be considered heroic. Would that make him a hero or more of a protagonist? That kind of a character.
Well, every story has a protagonist. A protagonist just means the person upon whom the story is focusing. So I guess the question would be, does that make him a hero?
Just from the description you gave, I haven't read it, but I would say that doesn't sound super heroic to me. At least, like, he achieves his own freedom, which is good for him. But, if you work really hard at solving it, like making a really complicated jigsaw puzzle, that doesn't necessarily make you a hero, even though you overcame, like, challenges to get to that point. I think to be a hero, it has to be on a wider scale than doing something good for you. Like, you have to make some kind of just change to the people around you or the world around you or something, even if it's unintentional.
Yeah, it's about that, the inspiration that it's giving to others. I mean, you could see a slave escaping from those circumstances into freedom as being heroic to the people that are still slaves. I mean, somebody like Harriet Tubman was an enormous hero to everybody during that time period and now, because she escaped for herself, but even if she hadn't gone back and rescued as many people as she had, it's still a heroic act to have been the one to inspire other people to see that it can be done, and I want to do it too. If the eventual result is something that is the opposite of something as terrible as slavery, then yeah.
That kind of raises the question of, is somebody a hero if other people just decide they're a hero and the person that did it was just like, I wasn't doing it for any kind of higher purpose, I just wanted to do this thing. And other people, like I'm drawing a blank on examples right now, but there's a lot of stories I can think. Oh, okay. Here's one. The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games. Katniss is made into this symbol for the revolution, and she's filmed in these very carefully crafted propaganda, but she herself is, super depressed and traumatized and makes a lot of horrible choices. So, I mean, is she still a hero, even though she doesn't do anything particularly heroic herself, but people choose to think of her as one?
I think, and she does in the end. There's at
the very end, yeah.
She does. I can think of, I'm from Texas, and a real world example would be like the Alamo, where a lot of people were trapped and didn't intend to be heroes, but they did choose to stay in the end, and their sacrifice was something that created the state of Texas. And in a lot of ways, heroes are made. Sometimes the idea of the hero is more important than what the person intended or who the person themselves was.
I think another part of this, and this goes sort of into that psychology thing I was talking about earlier, is that you're sort of faced with not wanting the praise for your actions, and that's what makes a character into a hero sometimes, is that they're expected to do these things, and they're sort of pushed into these positions, and at the same time they do something great, and then they go, like you said, I wasn't doing anything that anybody else wouldn't have done. But in that level of humility also sort of elevates them to that level of hero, because other ponies are looking at them going, I would never have done that. And so it makes and to them it's nothing normal. They don't want the praise, they don't want the recognition, they don't want the title of hero. They just want to be normal. And Princess Twilight's a good example of that when she first, right after the end of season 3, when she becomes an alicorn. She's like, I'm not a princess, I'm just a normal pony. But they're elevating her to this new level that she doesn't necessarily feel comfortable with, or feel that she's necessarily earned. But people still look at her as a hero in that sense, and that she did something great. And she's going, I just did what any friend would have done for another friend, type of thing. And so there's that aspect of it too in writing a hero.
Heroism, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. The fellow slaves might consider him a hero. The slave owners probably thought the exact opposite. So, as much as we can debate what makes a good hero in literature, that definition is, especially in real world situations, going to change a lot based on what point of view you're coming from about the moral rightness or wrongness of the situation and stuff too.
All right, and we are starting to draw in on the end of our panel here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these 2 final questions, and then we're going to give all of our panelists a chance to offer up some parting thoughts. Go ahead.
So, I read Harlan Ellison's, I guess his most famous work, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. And as much as people praise it, it left a bad taste in my mouth because it was just so depressing.
Agree. The mouth that you don't have?
Yes. And it seemed like that story was so dystopian. It was a Kobayashi Maru scenario where there is no possibility of success and everybody dies. So does an environment like that where you can't win, does that environment have any place for a hero? And if so, how would you put one into it?
I would say definitely has a place for a hero. I mean, how you handle, one of the typical things we talk about, a lot of heroes don't survive. They made the sacrifice, right? A lot of heroes go on suicide missions. There's no chance for success, and how you face death a lot of times is something that, people get called heroes for. It's how brave you are in the face of impossible odds, even when you still fail. There was actually a great Ponyfic story that I read, and I cannot remember the name of it now. Moments, I think, by, I want to say, is that Bad Horse that wrote Moments, to say? Yeah, and in this story, basically, the world is coming to an end. Twilight's seen it. She got stuck in a time loop, sort of Star Trek style, but she can't stop it. It's absolutely impossible. So she spins 1,000 loops optimizing the end of the world and trying to make it so that like some life on the planet will still survive, like hiding seeds involved, stuff like that. And I think that was heroic in the face of inevitable death.
Yeah, I would say that there's really nothing more heroic than trying to do the right thing, even if you know that it's going to be, futile or that it's going to be a drop in the ocean in the long run. I would say there's nothing more heroic than that because it's, like I said earlier, it's the choice between what's right and what's easy.
And explicitly in the case of I have no mouth and I must scream, which you mentioned, there is an explicitly heroic act in it, spoilers, which the main character who is getting tormented by this machine basically helps his friends commit assisted suicide and becomes the last one left for the computer to torment. And that is, completely remarkably, unambiguously bleak, but that is something where there is a sacrifice being made to preserve the sanity of others.
Well, and to directly address your question of if in a situation where it's very grim like that and there is no positive outcome, is there a place for a hero? Spoiler alert, Game of Thrones, everybody dies. Is there still room for a hero? I would argue absolutely. There are several heroes that we can see in that series for people that have seen it. But even in a situation where at the end everything is bleak and not going to go the way you want it to go, there is still room for a hero. They might die in the end, but
In fact, that's probably, as it was said, the most important time for heroes to be there, because that's their job, is to create hope. All right, and our final question.
Well, all right. I just realized that like 90% of my questions weren't about heroes, but I would like to point out one of my favorite heroes that had the possibility to be extremely overpowered but didn't would be Vash the Stampede from Trigun. I mean, he literally dodges bullets, but he was written in a way that he was overpowered, but he wasn't overpowered.
I feel like if you're a good enough writer, you can give a character whatever powers you want and make them still interesting, short of like omnipotence. And even then, maybe you could make an interesting story out of that. Like, there's a reason that Superman has persisted, even though 99% of his stories are incredibly boring and terrible.
I was going to say some of the best stories I've seen when I've really admired the writing are the ones where they've done the power escalation thing. And usually you're talking superheroes or anime and stuff when you do that, but where the writers have gotten themselves in that power escalation game and yet kept an interesting story. Not just, there's just a big light show now while two Supermans in the latest movie punch it out and explosions happen, but where it still maintains interest and conflict and uncertainty, even when the powers have escalated off the charts. So those are the times when writers really shine and can still do that. It's difficult, but it looks really good when it's done. And Vash is a good example.
All right, thank you. So let's go ahead and just each of our panelists leave everyone with a parting thought about heroes or heroism, in whatever order you feel prepared to do so.
Your question, Horizon 3.
Okay, so I guess I'll start this one off. I guess the two biggest issues, or the two biggest things I would think to remember when writing a hero is that there's a couple of very important things to think about. Is that they're not egotistical characters, generally speaking. There's a few exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, they're not in it for themselves. They're in it for everybody else. And so if you're writing a character, they have to remember that they're not perfect. Otherwise, they become a Mare-y Sue character if they are perfect. And that they are part of a team, and they have to remember that they're part of a team and give credit where credit is due, both to their friends and to themselves, even though they don't want to do it. And they have to be willing to do the things that might mean they are not the ones that survive. And a good example of this, just to put it out there again, is Of Skies Long Forgotten, which I mentioned earlier. One of the main character companions ends up sacrificing himself so that the main character can live and the rest of the civilization, the Pegasi civilization, can continue on. And he realizes going in that it's a suicide thing that he's doing, but he's buying time for everybody else. And so he's the one that decides, I'm going to make that sacrifice. And nobody knows. He's not praised as a hero, but he does it anyway. So again, he's not in it for himself. It's a humility thing that really comes to the forefront in a lot of cases with heroes. Not always, but a lot of the time.
I find myself just coming back again to the what is the difference between what is right and what is easy, and making that kind of choice. Because I think that everybody wants to think of themselves as the kind of person, if they were walking down the street and they saw somebody getting mugged, that they would go up and they would help in whatever way they can. But I also think that most people know, even if they don't want to necessarily admit it, that if that happened, they'd probably just put their head down and walk a little bit faster, because that's what real life bears out. Like, that's what happens. So I think people really admire characters that can do that, characters that do stop and help, because it's a quality that they really want to see in themselves and in others in general. It's something that everybody really admires, because everybody knows how difficult it is to make the right choice when it's inconvenient.
Or just unpleasant, even more than inconvenient. Yeah.
You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become even more heroic. Or the villain.
Yeah. Or Mare-y Sue.
Yeah. Or Mare-y Sue. Which might be interchangeable with villain. I want to Mare-y Sue villain. Yeah. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, I don't know if I have much more. I think I said most of what I was going to say, so yeah, I guess we can move it on to them.
And there's a lot of really good stuff that's already been said, for sure. I think I agree with all the definitions of a hero as being someone who makes those difficult choices in spite of it not being the easy thing to do. But I just wanted to throw out that there is a lot of great literature and a lot of great stories that aren't about heroes. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're about villains. They're just about people. But if you're looking to make it into a hero, it is a combination of those things. There has to be heroic acts. There has to be a perception that changes other people, that inspires other people.
Sort of following from that, heroes are still people. I mean, even if they're Superman or even if they're ponies, at the end of the day, to keep your heroes interesting, you can't just give them powers. You can't just give them a machine gun and bravery. They need to be complex, interesting characters in the first place. So when you're writing a hero, no matter how powered or non-powered they are, no matter how normal or extraordinary they are, try and keep a full vision of them. Try and make them fully fleshed out three-dimensional characters. And remember, three-dimensional characters can have flaws, and that's where your conflicts are going to come from. And you'll get much more interesting heroes if you know what's going on inside their head as you write them.
And with that, thank you all for your attendance, and thank you all for some wonderful questions. And great.